To begin, we're going to discuss planning. In SharePoint 2013, there's a lot of additional planning that you may not be used to if you're coming from SharePoint 2007 or 2010. We'll talk about in this section is administrative basics, the physical topology and the changes therein, the authentication concepts. This may be something new for a lot of you. Required technologies to build your SharePoint farm. Administrative roles in the farm itself. First off, on administrative basics, SharePoint has many different levels of administration. If you have some experience with SharePoint before, you'll understand that how things go in the hierarchy of SharePoint administrators. Everything from the farm administrator, the operating system administrator, down to the collection administrator, to the site administrator, even to library administrators. So know that there are these different levels that you're going to need to work with and plan out as to who gets what responsibilities and what roles in your final server deployment. All levels have deep access. A lot of times administrators will look and plan on the top couple of levels, maybe the farm administrator and the operating system level administrator, and then kind of pass off the collection administrator or the site administrators to other people. Know that each of these levels has very deep access, and for proper governance, you need to map out exactly who has access in each place to be able to have a successful rollout. The challenge is that if you don't have that, you can get some very interesting surprises coming back in later. That you have to worry about who's got access to what. And if you've given additional access to people who shouldn't have it, while you do have auditing logs that can show where they have been, you probably don't want it to have gotten to that level to begin with. Tools vary from cloud applications for managing it to SharePoint web interfaces to PowerShell commandlets. Each of these pieces are very useful. If you're used to a SharePoint server situation where in maybe 2010, where most of your tools have been in the clients, you'll notice that in SharePoint 2013, the client has come back a lot, and most of the interfaces are going into the web interface. That being said, new to SharePoint 2013 is a full PowerShell commandlet interface as well. So if you're a administrator that likes scripting, you're going to really love SharePoint 2013 and the power that lets you come into play. The physical topology. When you're working with SharePoint 2013, know that virtualization has been fully embraced. With SharePoint 2010, you'll remember that there were some movements towards virtualization, but getting fully certified in a virtual environment was fairly challenging, and you had to do a lot of, and remember this, or if you step out of this bound, then you're no longer supported. With SharePoint 2013, a lot of the actual recommended guidance is to move over to virtual servers. For Microsoft, a lot of this has happened because of the move to cloud, but this benefits you as well because now bringing up different configurations and moving servers around becomes a lot easier. Bringing up a new virtual instance of any of your farm servers becomes very simple. Moving them around, changing them around becomes a lot easier for your management tasks. Specialized servers are still important. The database server or storage servers still are better on physical hardware for a on-site implementation. Now, if you're going to cloud, things get a little bit different, and we'll discuss that when we get into that point. But as you're going into these specialized servers, make sure that you've got the plans in place to be able to handle them and be able to work things very simply, because those are going to be your performance bottlenecks. The topology is now focused mainly on logical concepts and workflow balancing on each machine. If you're coming from a SharePoint 2007 or 2010 administrator role, you'll remember that the SharePoint servers were fairly rigidly bound inside the server farm. With 2013, you're given a lot more freedom to put the roles in different servers or actually cluster different servers in different ways. With the previous versions of SharePoint, if you remember, web front ends were fairly rigidly defined. They may have an index server or a search server, but normally you would have specific roles that would go into those servers. With 2013, now you can actually have clusters of different app servers for different roles and to be able to actually manage failover and load balancing in a very granular level. When we go into the management piece, we'll discuss that a little bit further. For authentication concepts, this is where things have changed probably the most with SharePoint. If you're used to SharePoint administration, SharePoint now defaults to claims-based authentication for install. What this means is that as opposed to forms-based or Active Directory-based authentication, you're actually coming into claims-based. This is a good thing because now that you can pull in federated services, you can pull in all manners of management tasks very easy with SharePoint without running into some of the challenges we've had before with Kerberos and pass-through authentication. The legacy modes can still be enabled through PowerShell, so know that if you've got an environment where you do need to have a forms-based or a Windows-based authentication, you're still going to be supported, but note that this is a very strong message from Microsoft that you need to be looking at the new authentication mechanisms, and you need to be ready for those going forward because, well, things may not be supported going forward. The claims-based authentication enables many new scenarios. If you're running a traditional environment, you can actually have federated through Azure. You can actually have multiple farms or domains that you can bring through and have a lot of different trusts between areas that you normally couldn't in the original configurations. But this also means that you can do things such as allow users coming in from social networks or be able to come in from other OAuth providers. If your organization has strong social media such as Facebook, you can actually provide scenarios for those users to interact with your public website or with your social connector and have a very managed and powerful connection there. Now we'll discuss the required technologies. SharePoint technology is surprisingly simple. If you're used to SharePoint in the past where there's been lots of different pieces in play, with SharePoint you'll need Microsoft SQL Server 2008, Release 2 Service Pack 1. Yes, it's a long term. 64-bit or 2012. You actually have your choice there. Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1 or 2012. Currently, 2012 R2 is not supported. We expect to see that to change fairly quickly, so keep an eye on that one on the Microsoft site. And possible Azure Cloud Services, depending upon your configuration. This is one thing that Microsoft is being very proactive with, providing different technologies, not just on your local installation, but actually remote for your location, to be able to pull in things such as business connectivity services on the cloud, to be able to actually help you work not just inside your firewall, but actually expand outward, be able to work with your partners, to be able to work with different other services, to be able to bring those services into your local installation. And the administrative roles. Remember, farm administrators are the super users of SharePoint. When you give someone a farm administrator role, they get access to everything, including the backups, which are everything in SharePoint, which means that they can manage the user accounts of everyone else. So be aware of that. The second piece is the Windows administrators or the OS administrators. These users also have those same level of access. A lot of administrators forget about this and actually don't consider locking down the Windows administrator nearly as much as they should. Know that if you've got a differentiator between the Windows administrators and the SharePoint administrators, that's not as clear-cut as you might think. The Windows administrators have access to file system caches. They have access to a number of different backup locations. So know that you need to be very aware of what's going on those servers with the administrators and how you put those into place. You also have the service application administrators. These are the roles that are in place to be able to, for SharePoint to be able to do things such as crawls, to be able to do things such as processing logs and health reports and those types of things. With SharePoint 2013, managed users come into place for this. For a lot of these instances, you should not have actual users on these, but you should have AD roles that actually manage their own passwords. So this is something that's actually helped out to be locking down your SharePoint farm very, very much more, you should take a look at this. And when we're discussing the installation, we'll talk about how you can actually utilize this to make your server farm a lot more secure. Features administrators. These are situations where you've actually got different features being rolled into SharePoint. These may be custom applications, or these may be purchased features that come into play. These have different roles that you'll actually see coming in. They may need external access if these features are actually accessing data or services outside of your environment. So know that this is going to be probably the most varied of your situations where you have an administrator. Be very aware of what's going on with these features. Know well what you're working with. Know your vendors or your developers, and keep an eye on what's going on these particular accounts. And then there are the site administrators. These are both the site collection and the specific site administrators. These are often your power users and your normal users, your projects, your site repositories, your document repositories. All of these can fall into this area. These users should be locked down as much as you can. They should not have any access outside of SharePoint, so you're in good shape there. But knowing what they have and what access becomes underneath the SharePoint sites becomes something to keep an eye on. You should always review these, and these site administrators are the users that you probably need to do the most auditing on, because these users are generally less well trained. You probably want to have a pretty solid training story for them, but they rotate through fairly well, so you want to be able to make sure that they're getting access to what they need so they're not frustrated, but that they don't have access outside of that, whereas they may get into areas where they shouldn't, such as projects where they're not authorized to, maybe different groups in the company, maybe HR or those kind of things, where there may be some challenges with management.